Excellent. Thank you very much for coming. Welcome to LSE for this evening's hybrid event hosted by Contemporary Turkish Studies and the European Institute. My name is Atak, and I'm a professor of European politics and chair of contemporary studies at the European Institute at LSE. And this event is part of the program Turkish Week 100 Years of Republic. I'm very pleased to be welcoming our 6 speakers, and in a moment I will ask them to introduce themselves. I will not dare introduce them myself, because it would also take too long and you would all get bored. Okay, so I'm aware of that and I'll let them introduce themselves. And I want to introduce the event a bit. As you know, yesterday was International Women's Day, and we wanted to celebrate this day and achievements of women in the centenary of the Turkish Republic. The reason why we want to celebrate the successes of women or successful stories of women, it's also because when the Turkish Republic was founded in 1923, one of its missions was the advancement of women and to create almost successful women in science and technology. So we have prominent female researchers from Turkey here, and we will talk about their contributions to science and technology in the UK. Coming from different disciplinary backgrounds, our speakers share their personal experiences in building careers. So we are looking at an event that is slightly different than the usual type of events that we have at LSE. So it's not in panel format where each speaker will have 5 to 10 minutes having an intervention of some sort, and then we're having a discussion. Instead, we are going to have a nice chat and a conversation, and we really hope that you can be a part of that as well. And through that, we hope that our speakers' stories will inspire the next generation of scientists. Simultaneously, when you were coming in, I'm sure you have seen that we have a photo exhibition entitled Empowered Girls, Empowered Futures. And you will be able to take a look at the photos. And I really ask you to read the stories as well. The photos are beautiful, but the stories are even more beautiful and inspiring. These are the stories of young, successful girls from Turkey, and you will have a chance to take a look at them after the forum during the drinks reception. And I would like to thank Candan Fetvacı, who is here in the room with us today, and Begüm Doğan as well, and Hanzade Doğan will join us hopefully later. And Aydın Doğan Foundation, of course, for curating the exhibition, which was photographed by Mustafa Seven, and the stories were interviewed by Melis Alpan. We're grateful to your support and thankful that through your exhibition, we were able to enrich Turkish Week. For those Twitter users, the hashtag for today's event is #LSE Turkey. And I would like to ask you, remind you to turn your phones off or put it to silent so that there won't be a disruption. This event is being recorded, and we also have an audience on Zoom. So there are some people who are watching us, hopefully also from Turkey. And the recording will be available on YouTube and as podcast. So even though it might appear as if we're a small group here, the conversation might have an impact in the future. Once we have an initial round of discussions or conversation, we will open the floor to the wider audience, and you will get a chance to ask questions. So there is no particular order to our discussion today, as I've said. We wanted this to be a free-flowing conversation, as we will be sharing personal experiences more than anything else. So I'll sit down and first ask our speakers to introduce themselves. Maybe we can start from Professor Emine Yılmaz.
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Emine Yılmaz. I'm a professor of computer science at UCL, as well as a Turing Fellow. And at the same time, I'm an Amazon scholar working on Alexa. My research interests are in the fields of natural language processing, information retrieval, broadly speaking, in AI. Nice to be here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Melis Duyar. I'm a senior lecturer at the School of Chemistry and Chemical Engineering at the University of Surrey. I lead a research group that focuses on applying chemical engineering principles to solve problems related to climate change, energy security, and plastics pollution.
Hi everyone, I'm Kalender. I'm a senior scientist at AstraZeneca. So I worked on early oncology, early drug discovery using novel sequencing technologies and in general cancer genomics.
Hello everyone, my name is Özge, and I'm a professor of entrepreneurship and innovation at the University of Oxford. I do research on, in general, on how technology affects society, and in particular through the lens of entrepreneurship. So currently I'm looking at how technologies such as AI and blockchain can affect financial inclusion and bring banking services to those who currently don't have access.
Hi everyone, thank you, Atak. It's a pleasure to be here. And I'm Zeynep Okray. I'm a neuroscientist. I'm interested in understanding how neural circuits work together to help us learn and remember. And I'm currently working as a postdoctoral scientist at the University of Oxford.
Quickly add that Zeynep is the artist behind the photo that we used to promote the events. So the collage of the fruit fly.
Yes, I am very fond of fruit flies. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Özge Eyice. I'm a senior lecturer in microbial ecology at Queen Mary University of London. I work on environmental microbiology, microorganisms like in greenhouse gases and that affect climate change.
Very much for these very quick introductions. As you can see, this is a very efficient group. And there is no surprise there. As young, successful women, you, I'm sure, learned how to be efficient in your lives and in your careers. So my first question would be, knowing your backgrounds a little, I know that all of you were born in Turkey and raised in Turkey as well, but some of you maybe when you were teenagers, maybe some of you in your 20s, went to another country, perhaps directly came to the UK. And so my first question is, what brought you here? Why are you in the UK? Even if you took a detour and went to other countries, maybe you might want to tell that story too. And while you were doing that, you might also prefer to talk about your career path in general. And if there is a moment in time that you can say, oh, this is when my career changed, when my life changed. Sometimes coming to a different country is a life-changing moment, but then it can be, a career moment as well, that you feel like your life has changed. So shall we start with Zeynep?
Sure. So I actually had the opportunity to do my doctorate studies in Belgium. And I realized that for somebody who grew up in Turkey and lives there, academia actually provided a good way to, perhaps travel and even live in different countries. And Belgium was, University of Leuven there was, gave me the opportunity to start my PhD. And once I was done there, the reason I came to the UK was I was essentially enticed by sort of these excellent centers for research in the UK. And I was specifically interested in a question that currently the group I'm working in is interested in. So I was essentially following my academic interests.
Great. Anyone else who followed their academic interests or other interests, perhaps?
Same for me, actually. I did my PhD in the US, and at the time I didn't really think about UK per se, but there was a very famous research lab in Cambridge, and they were really great. So I basically picked the lab that is the best in my area, which is still doing great in artificial intelligence. And then that led me to come here. And after that, I just stayed because I could see that there are many great researchers that I could work with here. And that's why I'm still here.
I took a bit of a detour as well before coming to the UK. I have to credit a lot my undergraduate professors. Actually, I think they've had a big impact because when I was studying at Koç University in Turkey, I had the opportunity to work for a computational systems biology laboratory, where I realized that I don't really care for computational research or biology, but I really love doing research. And when I was done with my project and presenting to Professor Özge, who was leading the research group, she said, "Oh, it looks like you've done a master's worth of work already. You would be good at this." And I remember that being very helpful in giving me the confidence to apply for graduate programs. And I think afterwards, I had to get letters of recommendation, and everyone I asked at the department was actually quite helpful in helping me decide where to go. Ultimately, I ended up in the US. I think the primary factor was that they have an integrated master's PhD program, which is fully funded if you get into the program. So that was the main motivator for me going to the US. I started out in New York, then took a postdoc in California, moving further and further away from Turkey. And then at that point, I thought I was in a position to maybe pick the next step. And I decided I want to move actually closer to Turkey and be here.
Yeah. I think it is a motivation for all of us being closer to home. And I just realized that, my career story, which is a completely different field and is not really the subject of this forum at the moment. I'm totally aware of it, but it's a very similar story because I'm a Koç graduate as well. I was inspired by my professors, encouraged by my professors there. I went to the US. So it's a very similar story, but I went to Turkey and then came to the UK. Again, it's not my story that we need to be focusing on. So anyone else? I mean, yeah, no?
I think my story is quite similar. I went to the US just because in my field, the research there seemed to be quite good. And I remember a distinct moment in my last year of the PhD when I needed to apply to schools as an assistant professor. And I just felt this kind of barrier. I felt so nervous applying to US schools. And I realized it wasn't because these schools were good. In fact, they were amazing, but I felt like I needed to be closer to home. And so the solution was to then apply to Europe. And my first job was in Spain, which now I always describe it as a beautiful shoe that didn't fit, in the sense that it was a beautiful life there. And it was, there were many advantages, but it was also, compared to the UK, it was quite a closed society, at least where I was, which was Barcelona. And so after a while, we made a conscious choice to live in a country where we could have a family. And so for that, we chose the UK because for us, it was a good combination of amazing research and also a relatively open society to immigrants in general compared to others, and also not too far from Turkey.
Okay. Yes.
Actually, your closed society remark, it's a nerve with me as well, because I mean, my story is very similar to Zeynep, because I also did my PhD in Belgium. It was a very nice environment, but then after a while, it is not as welcoming as I expected to be, or as I wanted it to be. I stayed there for 10 years. So after my PhD, I tried to get a more senior position, but it was not really possible. So we decided to take a step back and look at our situation where we can move from here. We had children at the time. So you want to move them to a society where they also feel like they can belong. And like we've been here now 3 years. I'm very happy with my career, and I'm also happy with that they can also feel more at home than they did in Belgium.
Any other stories about Belgium? Not about Belgium. But then we can come back to Belgium later on. Yeah? If you
No, please.
Now, mine is a bit similar as well. A bit coincidentally, I came to the UK because I did my degree in Istanbul Technical University, and there was a new academic who did his PhD in Newcastle, up in the north. just came back, and in Istanbul Technical University, you need to do internship. So I went to him like, how about I go to UK for my internship because my cousin was living in London. And I said, well, I did my PhD in Newcastle. Shall I send you to Newcastle? And this is how my story started. I didn't even know where Newcastle is in the UK. I just came to the Newcastle. And then if any of you is from Newcastle, you will know they are ever so friendly. And that was one of the life-changing moments for me because there is no hierarchy. I loved it. I want to do lab work. And it doesn't matter if you're a professor or if you're an undergraduate student, everyone is respectful to each other, but there is no hierarchy. It's just exactly what I wanted. But then I carried on with my PhD in Istanbul Technical University. But then a few years later, I decided that it's not the place for me. I left my PhD in Turkey. I started a brand new one in the UK back again because they do amazing science, and I really was fed up with hierarchy, and Eyice is famous with that. I can assure you.
So we'll come back to hierarchies in the UK, right? Because they do exist as well. So it's all relative or comparative.
Maybe different, maybe different subjects. You know,
Yeah.
it depends on what topic you are working on.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah, I mean, clearly there are more opportunities here in some respects. But in others, I guess advancement in the career might not be as easy as it looks at first. Coming here is one thing, but then advancing in the career is another thing. But I wanted to ask you about your story in Belgium. Like, why did you, I mean, you did your PhD there, but then you decided that you didn't want to stay there.
Yeah, so I think I agree with Zeynep. One of the things I've realized, I've been working and studying in universities in many, 3 or 4 different countries by now. And I realized that being Turkish, the experience of being Turkish is very different in very different countries. So, you know, there was something very clear from the general population of Belgium, and having worked in Belgium, it was a very different experience being a Turkish person working there than being a Turkish person here. I'm sure there are various reasons for this, but, you know, I started to appreciate it was almost like I had this this expectation off my back. I had the sort of the identity of being Turkish off my back a bit when I started living here. And I thought that was invaluable because it does put a lot of both positive and negative, it has both positive and negative aspects, let's say. So I also found Belgium to be relatively, you know, this very sort of Central European, somewhat conservative, very traditional values in the society. But I still, overall, my experience was positive there. So
Great.
but I imagine, I think you also, you started to go up in your career stage. I think that's another important thing to consider is, depending on your career stage, your experience becomes different.
Yeah, most definitely. So, but then I guess like from here, we can ask another question in terms of maybe 2 questions. I mean, you can take whichever question that you want. It's like the language, which you didn't mention, because you learned English probably early on, and then so does it make it easier to come to Britain, come to the UK, and then you feel less of a barrier in terms of language? And maybe in other countries, in Spain, there was the language problem a bit, perhaps, and in other European countries. So that is the first question that I want to ask. And then the second one is following up on what Zeynep has just said. How does it feel to be a woman from Turkey in the UK? So, I mean, being Turkish in the UK might carry less of a baggage when compared with Europe. But how about being a Turkish woman in the UK? Do you think that there is a difference? If you were men in your you know, degrees or universities, would things be different? Yes, of course. Melis, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, so about, I guess I can comment on being a woman in my discipline abroad in general. I think it carries some weight because what I first noticed when I went abroad for graduate school was that women are underrepresented in engineering disciplines, and there are even fewer Turkish women in those disciplines. So oftentimes, I felt like people were expecting me to be representative of Turkish women as a whole, which is impossible. And I know that it's impossible, but it does carry some weight. And it is a bit of a stress factor when you're trying to be abroad and learn some skills and succeed in your field. So, for example, I remember when I first showed up in my department, I would often get remarks like, oh, you haven't ever had a Turkish student here before. And, sure, that's fine. And then sometimes other remarks, I remember a professor commenting when I answered this question correctly, oh, they must educate you well in Turkey. And that kind of actually has an impact, I think, on your day-to-day, how you do your job, because people shouldn't form their opinions based on the first Turkish woman they meet, but they might. So it's, I think it's an additional stress factor.
Was there an advantage of being here?
That's an interesting question. So I don't remember where I read this, so I'm going to be a terrible academic and not cite my references. But I remember reading that you can turn your disadvantage into an advantage. For example, when you go to a conference and you're the only woman there, people are likely to remember who you are, whereas they might not remember everyone they meet. So there can be opportunities that come up from being recognizable or memorable. And that's the only one I can think of really, is that I did tend to form really good networks. I don't know if it was necessarily tied to me being Turkish, but if you want to see a silver lining, I think that's probably the closest thing I can offer.
Yeah, so I'm experiencing being Turkish and being a woman separately, in a sense. And being a woman in academia is both, there are challenges in the sense that if you, I think like Melis said, if there are not so many of you, then you end up being put in lots of committees and, in front of lots of audiences just because they love the fact that you're there. And that's flattering, but at the same time, you need time to do your job. And so that is definitely a challenge that I think is there. And depending on the field, I think that it could be more or less challenging. And I have to say, within my field, I deal with industry leaders a lot. So, the CEOs of companies might be my guest speaker, etc. So in that setting, you realize just how few women are senior leaders in the industry. And that makes it quite difficult for that relationship between the guest speaker and the professor to be right. Because that, you feel that much more. I think that in the industry, the representation of women is probably even worse compared to academia. And maybe just to complete, being Turkish here is definitely better than being Turkish in many other places, at least in Europe. Maybe one anecdotal story that I can tell is that, so my partner is Dutch, and we had a dual job offer, and it was a pretty good one from Amsterdam before coming here. And one of the primary reasons why he was hesitant was that I would be subject to prejudice in the Netherlands, despite, the position in which we were going there. And in fact, whenever we go there, one of the things that I notice is that if people notice that I'm Turkish, they say, "Oh, but you don't look like a Turk," which is a compliment in some way for them, which isn't. And so that is, I think, a general problem in many places, perhaps a bit less here.
But I think it goes back to the point that you feel like you need to represent Turkish women, where you know that Turkish women, there's no one category as Turkish women, but you don't look Turkish, but there is no one category of Turkishness, that you can look different, you can have different, lifestyles, you can have different ideologies. So what do people have in mind when they make this comment that, oh, you don't look Turkish? I don't.
Yeah, it's very loaded, right?
Yes, it is very loaded, but I think we have all experienced that sort of comments at one point in our lives. But do you feel like a minority here? Or do you feel like you're part of a multicultural society?
I think it's interesting because I find it also as an advantage that it's pretty much a blank slate, because as you say, I've also had experiences where I'm the only Turkish person in my department, and they don't really know, are you minority ethnic? We don't know where to put you, you get on committees, so you're like, okay. But at the end of the day, I think there's something interesting where there's certain things that are unsaid. Like for me, travel has been always a big problem, even getting a Schengen visa to go to conferences. I can't go, once I missed the job talk because I couldn't get a visa on time. And these things, at the end of the day, they add up. And I think they do create a situation where you say like, but that's not fair. And, there are some unsaid parts of it. Otherwise, I would, I think it's a particularly, almost like it feels undefined in a way, and that can be good and bad.
I would like to talk briefly about being a woman in a man-dominated area, because it's related to the first question about career choices. So I'm a computer scientist, and during my PhD, I was one of the 3 women in a department which had like 70 PhD students, only women in the lab. During my postdoc, I was the only woman in the machine learning group of a very big lab. Now I am only woman in the AI center, which is based in the center. We have one more, but she's not based in the center, but amongst quite a few academics. So I've been always in environments where I'm like 1 or 2. There are 1 or 2 other examples, basically, and sometimes none, which is very difficult. And so just want to share my career choices related to that, because during my PhD, because of this issue, in the US, there is a conference called ASEAN Women, and they try to basically help women be part of academia, continue their academic careers, because quite a few women drop out. And as part of that event, basically one of the advice that was given to us is, don't just pick the research area or the professor you would like to work with, but try to pick someone or a place where they will really be supportive to your career progression, to your personal choices. And it's very important also, like as a postdoc, as a PhD student, for example, who you work with. And indeed, for example, to this ASEAN Women event, my PhD supervisor had to convince me, because it's a lot of work during PhD, you are very busy. He really pushed me to go attend this event. And that's had a big impact. Like when I chose my postdoc, for example, supervisor, I try to make sure that I work with a nice person, and I think it's very important. It had a big impact really on my career. Maybe I would have quit if he wasn't that supportive. And the same, like I think throughout the steps that the ladder, academic ladder that I moved, I think people around me and the mentors or managers that I had have played an extremely important role. So that's just one thing I would like to mention regarding being a woman in a male-dominated environment. I think that's one important thing to consider. Try to pick who you work with and where you work with, as opposed to just focusing on the research area that you work on.
That is a bit of a smart advice, though. I mean, it's like if you're really passionate about a research area, but if you can't find a supportive mentor, then I mean, yeah, you cannot really follow your passion. I mean, at the end of the day, it worked for you, but it shouldn't be this difficult, like when you're passionate about something, you should be able to find a mentor that would support you as a woman in a male-dominated area. But what I'm hearing from you is that doesn't happen often, and that's it.
I think it does. It depends. Like I think there are quite a few options, right? There are many countries, there are many academics, there are many people you can work with. So it's just a big factor that I think should be considered. I'm not saying that like just ignore the topic, because research is about loving what you do. So you should definitely find something that you like. But if you were given a choice, definitely you should go for a supportive environment, because it's important, equally important as the area you work on, I think.
Like I changed 2 schools until I found that, but I did. I think that it's a matter of searching and being conscious about it.
Exactly.
And then perhaps not giving up. Like if in one institution you've had a horrible mentor, and I think like all of us have this experience at one point in time. So we need to be agile as well, perhaps more agile than other people, and then be prepared to move around and start over, start again a couple of times until we get the right fit And it sounds like, you know, if you have a goal in mind, you just need to work towards it and not give up. But I was wondering about career advancements as well. So do you think that, because I mean, it's part of the, you know, minority question being a woman, how about career advancement? How about, you know, being a professor? We have more junior colleagues, more senior colleagues, colleagues who have perhaps left academia. So do you want to perhaps talk about that experience, like why you quit academia and then decided to move to AstraZeneca?
I got this question quite a lot because I mean, I spent 10 years in academia, so all of my friends are from academia, and this is a move sometimes like frowned upon. It's like leaving academia. What's bad about that? And I think there are two reasons for that. Because one of the reasons is like that comes to my background. I studied statistics actually in university, and I took a biostatistics course as an elective course, and it really changed my perspective. I realized that I can do real impactful stuff with statistics. I can touch people's lives. I can make a difference in the end. So that really motivated me to go a bit onto life sciences. So that's why I did a master's in Sweden in computational biology, then did a PhD in computational biology. So I'm really passionate about making a difference at some point. So that was one aspect. The other aspect is the biomedical research, biomedical science landscape is changing. Now, the companies, startups are making more risky research, so more basic research in a way. So it's not only in academia now the fundamental basic research is done, but it's also done in pharma, in biotech. So with all these reasons combined, when I was nearing the end of my postdoc, I started looking, and I actually took some courses from AstraZeneca when I was doing my master's in Sweden. So I knew that they were more research oriented. And I met with the group, I met with people, and I'm really, really happy. I mean, it's the stuff that I'm doing, the research that I'm doing now is very similar to what I was doing at university. But in the end, I know that some of this research might contribute to a drug at one point. It might really change the lives of some people in the end. So, and that's a really motivational thing for me. Yeah. So don't be afraid.
Yeah, change your career path in some respects. But how about like promotion and advancement? Does anyone want to make a comment on that?
Well, I can say that now I'm at the point where actually it's a junction of, you know, I need to think about what's to come next. And maybe one thing to say that, you know, it's a bit more challenging in the UK compared to Europe. You know, Europe has, at least in the parts that I've been, there are some more perhaps like socialist laws or some more support that you can get as an academic, financially especially. So that's one of the reasons, for example, for me to make the decision. If I decide to stay in the UK, I think I would try to avoid academics. But that's because, you know, I'm planning, you know, it depends on your life circumstance, it depends on where you want to live. But there are certain, you know, certain aspects of the societal and social and economic factors that you have to consider. And I think in that sense, you know, the UK is great for being an academic at early stages. Later on, it depends on where you live. I mean, we have many academics here, but that's one of the reasons, for example, I would consider going to industry as well, but not for everyone.
Can I mention your recent success? Would that be all right?
No, I just got my paper accepted in Nature. That's why it's,
Whatever you want to do, it will be easier to do it.
yeah, I know that's a big currency for us, you know, in academia and also in other, in industry as well. Sort of, it becomes our biggest currency for securing the job that we want or securing money to do the research that we want to do.
How many years did you work on that research?
Yeah,
I remember the answer.
No, the thing is that there's a lot of luck involved as well. I'm sure like you guys can all say this, but I remember, you know, this idea came to me sometime in 2018 or so. And then afterwards, it was two senior postdocs me and a colleague that worked full-time until now, basically on it. So it takes a long time to produce these things. And by the way, you can get nothing out of it as well. So this is the reality of research. I still love it. But of course, for the downtimes, and I think that's why the more boring and less inspiring aspects of day-to-day life become important, because it's possible that you don't get the return of your investment sometimes. So it's a bit of a bet hedging, and you need to see where you're going to go, what you want to do.
But I think the bottom line is like you need to persist or
Yes.
go on.
Tenacity is the
tenacity,
key.
perseverance. These are key
And it's fun.
aspects of success that way. But I want to go back to the question of being here in Turkish and being in the UK. Through an example, perhaps, that we can discuss. When the earthquakes happened, we were all here. We experienced the earthquakes on the 6th of February, and while we were here in the UK. And I was wondering about your experience. How did it feel like being away from what was happening? And did you feel that perhaps you were in a more secure environment, or did you feel like you were a foreigner? And Özge, because you have been awfully silent, I'll ask you to go start the discussion. It felt awful. I'm trying to choose my words carefully, but I had zero support or even zero emails from colleagues, from heads of schools. Usually they are very careful about EDI, equality, diversity, inclusion, and they send out emails when things happen in the world, wars or other things. But suddenly they all got quiet because in a way it's good that they forgot that I am Turkish, you know. They completely forgot. But I am at Queen Mary University of London, which is in East London, and our community is heavily people living around there, immigrants, Turkish communities. Even in my class, first year, I have 4 or 5 Turkish students. So they could easily send out an email, complete silence. From my colleagues, nothing. Only one of them emailed me, the least expected one, sent me an email asking me if I'm all right, which I wasn't all right. And I openly said, I'm not all right. Whoever asked me, how are you? I am not doing all right. And if you're asking if we are secure here, it's the opposite. I just wanted to go back to Turkey because you feel so terrible. And until I try to feel I belong to the UK, although I'm British citizen, my husband is English, I have a daughter, I have a life here, you know, extended family, British English extended family. And I started to feel like, okay, I'm belonging. I've been here for 15, 16 years. But after the earthquake, I felt like, no, I'm not here. I'm 100% Turkish. I want to go back there, but I can't because I can't find happiness. I don't care what state Turkey is in now. I can be happy anywhere, by all means, you know, it's my country. I can be happy. I don't agree, like, what are you going to do in Turkey under its currency? I don't care. But I have an English husband and a little daughter. How can they find happiness there? That's why I felt trapped. They were trapped under rubber. I felt trapped in my house.
We felt the same, yeah.
I think we all felt the same. And here as well, I mean, I had wonderful colleagues from the European Institute. And I could count on them, and I could speak with them, and that they understood the situation very quickly. And I'm grateful for their support. They reached out to our students, but our department was the only department, I think, who was able to act quickly. And then it's not a surprise because this is the department that actually established contemporary Turkish studies. They already had Turkey in mind, and they felt that Turkey was part of what they were doing. But other departments, I don't know what other reasons. I met with students, I met with colleagues, and they all felt like there wasn't enough compassion or there wasn't enough support going on. Anyone who wants to follow up on that? I mean, perhaps we can also think about like why does this happen? It could be because they forgot that we were Turkish. In my case, I don't think that they could. I carry the label of chair of contemporary Turkish studies. It's pretty impossible. But could it be because of cultural differences?
I tried to explain, for example, I also felt very alienated by this, right? Because I was feeling very intensely, and I was trying to explain why I was feeling this way. And they're like, did you lose anyone that's directly that you love? It's like, no, actually not, but it doesn't matter. And I had difficulty explaining this. I've had people ask me, oh, are you nationalist? Like, it doesn't have to do with nationalism. So this was, I think that was what was tiring for me. And maybe I couldn't articulate it, I don't know.
I felt the same way. I think that question of did you lose someone that you, like a family member, I think that the answer to that, if that the answer was no, people felt relieved and you said, oh, okay, then Whereas to us, it was such a big tragedy and it really didn't matter. All those people that were kind of crying for help on the rebels, we couldn't sleep while that was going on. But I also often thought about, are we viewed as nationalistic when we say these things? It doesn't feel like that to us, but.
Or how about emotional? That we are from the East, that we have all these passions and emotions running.
Absolutely.
So we are crying in the middle of a forum panel, look, people from the East. I like this. And
They know I have Mediterranean
Yeah,
fever. They
Mediterranean.
always tell me whenever I make a comment, oh, you have Mediterranean fever.
I haven't actually been accused of having Mediterranean fever before. Yeah, but it is, so, and then, but that's kind of also puts pressure on you. Like, how do you communicate and like the pain that you're going through? How do you make people understand that what you're, going through is actually significant, but try to do it in a professional appearing way, and because of these cultural differences, perhaps.
There's also a sense, at least, if something happens in that region of the world, it seems like because there's so many tragedies happening there, people seem to be a bit less sensitive at this point, which is very sad.
I think there are lots of critics, I told you, because I said my husband is English and he has great political comments. Then I said, well, why do they not care? Because the public hasn't been told to care about the earthquake. They were told to care about the war. So they're busy with the war now. So, there are lots of, you can direct public somehow by politics. And I think
As a professor of European politics, I can say that everything is about politics, right? But this is how we describe politics to undergraduate students. Politics 101, everything is political, right? And so it's not like you cannot separate from politics from anything else. But at the same time, I think that it is the experience of an earthquake. Like, how many of you have experienced an earthquake in your lives? If you're from Europe, you probably haven't experienced this, right? But war is something that people in the UK and people in Europe have been taught, because it's part of their experience, it's part of their memory, and it's public memory. So people can feel empathy towards the war situation, whereas they have no understanding of a natural disaster such as an earthquake. And then that boils down to the buildings were man-made, and so it's your fault, kind of, or the people are not thinking this, but we think that they are thinking this. Kind of at the background, we think that we kind of deserve this. This is what they're thinking probably when they're not really sharing the pain. But it might not be that. It's just maybe we're making it all too complicated for ourselves. Okay, shall we ask questions now? Maybe if you have any questions online, you can also write it in the Q&A box on Zoom, and I can read it. If you have questions in the audience, you can raise your hand. And there's a roaming microphone, I think. And so please wait for the microphone and state your affiliation and your name. And I'm going to try to take questions from the online audience and from the room.
Thank you. And thank you for your very candid reflections this evening. My name's Holly. I'm from the School of Public Policy. And so when I think about this topic and some of the experiences that you've reflected on, in my view, you're all kind of representing very male-dominated industries or fields, perhaps. And I'm kind of interested to see if you've seen any sort of sector-specific or industry-specific policies that have really been effective in encouraging women and progressing women in your respective fields.
I mean, yeah, they are trying. You know, this EDI thing, they are trying, but then sometimes you notice they are trying, but they are not feeling it. They are trying to tick some boxes. You know, we have lots of policies now to improve, you know, empower women. And I found some of them quite derogatory, actually, because I don't think like women should be empowered. We are already powerful. Men should change their view, but they do stuff. They are aware of it. That's actually back to one of the previous questions. How do we feel being a woman when you don't know there is a bias? You don't feel the bias. When they point out, you know, this actually happened to you because you are actually a woman, you come across incompetent. I don't know, when you apply for a job, when you apply for a project grant, the reason why you don't have it because you don't have an English name or you are not white man, middle age. So then you realize, oh, hold on, it's not because I'm not successful, it's because there are other things. So they are trying to change this. They keep giving the statistics, you know. Hopefully it will get to somewhere, you know.
I have a concrete example for you, which I've seen over the years, let's say last 10 years. I think a lot of the conferences that I've been to, now they make a very specific effort to have a gender balance in the speakers. And I think this has completely transformed interactions within conferences. They're trying to do the same thing for faculty, but it's been more challenging, I think.
Yes. So just a comment related to that. It's the same in computer science. Yes, there is this effort where they try to, in the organizational committees, they try to have women. But to the previous point that was made, there are like, I don't know, 5% of the entire researchers there are women. And then you keep being invited to the organizational committees. And as you mentioned, it's so much extra work. So there is a trade-off. There are, again, hiring committees. It's good now, you have to have a representative. And again, in a department where there are very few women, you have to be almost in all the hiring committees. And I know all the faculty members who are hired, which is great. I have a say in them. But overall, it's a lot of extra work.
And unpaid work.
Exactly. You are not necessarily appreciated. That in addition to this, you have to do all the additional work. So it's great that they care, and it is great. And I know some academics, actually, they basically say no if they are invited by a conference to give a talk, keynote talk, for example, which doesn't have enough women in the organizational committee. So you do see that perspective, but there is the other aspect that it's too much additional load on the women. So that has to be also considered, I think, in the long run.
Melis,
Just a quick example of one thing that I've seen is to have clearly defined, predetermined questions that you want to ask candidates for that you're interviewing for positions, right? That's really important because this is something that I didn't personally experience when I was doing job applications until I guess I came here. But sometimes job interviews tend to be the panel asks you whatever comes to their mind at the moment. And that's influenced by bias. Whereas if you just write everything down beforehand and you ask everyone a consistent set of questions, you can implement actual, structure to control the madness of, everyone trying to influence the hire in some way.
I mean, for true equality, yes, everybody needs to be asked the same question. If they were shortlisted, the panel should do exactly the same thing in the same order, otherwise you cannot guarantee equality. But in my experience, not all departments do that, unfortunately.
One thing that I do like, although, being in all these recruiting committees is very time consuming, one of the things that I've noticed is that there is now a clear policy at Oxford where if you have a job opening, there needs to be female candidates shortlisted. And if there are no females that were found to be eligible, then the post needs to stay open longer in order to, and female candidates need to be attracted. And then in the second stage, out of the shortlisted females, there needs to be a very good explanation for why they were not in the end chosen. And I think that when you're around a room and when you know that you need to report to the division or whoever you're reporting to, that you made a conscious choice and you did consider all these women, I think people start to think twice, and that's a good thing.
I'm going to Melis cite a resource that I cannot actually cite. I don't remember where I read this or where I've seen this, but statistically speaking, apparently it is very difficult for women to get shortlisted, but once they are shortlisted, they get the job, statistically or proportionally, and their chances of getting the job, if they're in the shortlist group, is much higher than men. So shortlisting is very important.
You know why this is sorry to interrupt, but they also figured out that men always apply job higher than their level, but women always apply at their level or even lower.
Yes.
So that's why they got the job as well.
Yes.
They're overqualified probably.
Probably,
You know?
probably. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
I think we can hear you.
I know, but it's for the people on Zoom.
Thank you very much for this panel. It's been amazing, and thank you very much for sharing your emotions, especially. I think I felt like home being a Mediterranean myself, and I wish we were able to gather exactly after the earthquake happened. Maybe we would have felt a little bit better and not feel so devastated by the fact that our colleagues didn't support us as much as we would have appreciated. I want to ask a question to all of the panelists, because I can appreciate that all of you have been away from Turkey in your career more than 10 years, apparently, both in Europe and in the UK. What would you have done differently, knowing where you are now at your stage, within these 10 years in your career? If you could change one thing in your
Do
career.
you have any tips in terms of avoiding things? Not positive tips, but perhaps things to avoid.
Right. Don't underestimate your own capabilities and skill set. I think what I really remember about when I first went abroad for the PhD program was feeling like an imposter. Right? We might all have this kind of feeling at some point, but I think it's easy to get caught up in the successful job application or the some achievement that you're having and think, when will I ever prove myself that I deserve this? But actually, I think my suggestion to my former self would be recognize the things that you're able to do and the skills that you bring to the team, because you're not actually getting something without contributing. And I think I remember feeling for a very long time that I'm just not going to finish the program. And at some point I will get stuck and I won't be able to do it. And I think it's easy to get caught up in the next job application, the next degree, and the next thing, and not appreciate that you're contributing something at the moment.
Maybe I think to build on that, one of the ways that I very much felt that too. One of the ways that I realized that I could maybe relieve that pain is to actually be open about how insecure I was feeling in different situations, because as soon as you open that conversation, the females around you suddenly join it. And then that feeling of you're alone and you're the only one who doesn't know what they're doing and everybody else does, that feeling goes away quickly once you start sharing. But I think that making that first step is typically quite difficult.
I would like to add that, I had this interesting conversation with someone recently about normalizing self-doubt. So we don't want to come to a point where, you know, at least for me, it's futile. I will feel bad about it. You know, achievements will stop at some times and then they come another time. So, you know, it's about normalizing that doubt and feelings, understanding and acknowledging your feelings. I would have done the same. I still to this day, I'm like, no, that wasn't me. But no, it's a really interesting, it becomes a psychological question. Also for me, I wish I was more, it worked out at the end, but I wish I made decisions more intentionally in terms of really understood, you know, what do I enjoy doing? What do I find very challenging? What am I good at? So constantly reviewing your own characteristics, your own passions, your own, you know, what's a non-negotiable for you? So these things really help ensure that you enjoy the process as well. Because, for example, doing a doctorate is not a prison time, right? Although it just feels like, okay, once I'm done, I'm going to do this. Once I'm done, I'm going to do this. And it does get very difficult at times, but I think you have to figure out ways that, all right, what's sort of acceptable and even enjoyable sometimes.
I can also add to that maybe. It's okay to ask help. It's okay to get help. I mean, when I started my postdoc in Cambridge University, I felt like an imposter all the time, like for 6 months. Okay, they're gonna discover that I don't know this. That they're gonna figure out now. And it's such a paralyzing feeling, and you just go into this cycle, you can't get out. But I mean, now I know everyone has it at one point, and it's okay. It's okay to stop. It's okay to get help. Help is available. So I think I would have done that differently. I would.
Where do you get your help from?
I mean, university has really good help center, like, or even in the institute. So I mean, once you ask, you realize that there is help available. But there is always, maybe it's also ties back to like being women in a male-dominated area. You just have to persevere, and you shouldn't.
But there's something interesting there, because I find that, you know, while I want to be open with these things, I realize the cost that it has sometimes, especially in professional environments where, you know, I've had people tell me, but, you know, you just have to be more confident, you know, you should really step up. And I'm like, it's not about that. But, you know, I think if you kind of form your close community somehow, people that you trust, their opinion, you know, that they know you a bit well, and have sort of like this home base where you could be vulnerable, and then, you know, have a bit of a thicker skin outside of that. That's useful.
Yeah.
No, go ahead. One of the things that I discovered as I was opening up to try to get help is that women who are maybe 10 to 20 years ahead of us in their career, they made it in an environment which was, I think, admittedly even tougher. And a lot of the advice I was getting from these amazing women was just to toughen up and to appear confident and don't talk about how you feel. And so that, in a sense, well, it did backfire because that's not helpful. But there's that, yes, Mediterranean mind. But there is that, I think that even some of the senior females can give that advice because of the path that they've been through.
We have an online question, but I want to ask this question with reference to also people who might be watching us now or later and who are in Turkey, inspiring scientists, perhaps 20 years younger than us. So this question is about the general scientific environment in Turkey. So in 2015, this is the question from Mina Toksöz, by the way. In 2015, the UNESCO science report had noted that Turkey was catching up in science and technology. But the 2021 UNESCO report concluded that the previous dynamism had slowed and Turkey was heading for a middle-of-the-road innovator track. Do the speakers agree, and why do you think the earlier progress may have faltered? And I would ask you to consider the possibilities here, and that, you know, us being here might be one of the reasons, right? And then I'd like to, combine that question with, for people in Turkey and in young people, and not necessarily women, and inspiring, but they don't want to go anywhere else. Do you have any tips for them in terms of like what can they do in an environment that is apparently faltering?
For those who want to stay in Turkey to do research, need resilience. For everyone, everywhere actually, in academia, especially, you have to be resilient. The same in Turkey, but not to take notice. Because I've done quite a few years. I mean, I was a research and teaching assistant at Istanbul Technical University for 6 years before I came here. So I know both countries very well in terms of academia. You just have to ignore. Yeah, but it's the same here. You just have to
Ignore what's happening around you, and
yeah,
just
because they will always talk. They will always try to stop you. At least that was my experience. But I also know very successful scientists in Turkey, worldwide successful. I know they struggle quite a lot due to different reasons. But it's not about money. It's not about equipment. I mean, Istanbul Technical University was one of the most resourceful universities. So we didn't have this issue. We had issues with people there. I'm not afraid to say that now, otherwise why would I leave? You know, I left there because of the people. Having said that, when I was an assistant professor, research assistant there, our director, vice principal here was a woman, head of department was a woman, head of institute was a woman. So it's not about sometimes about being a woman or a man.
In fact, I mean, if you look at the map of like highly successful women in academia, Turkey is at the top in Europe.
But it's also because I'm from molecular biology and genetics department. I don't want to talk about myself, but the reason why woman number was higher is because men don't want to do the job, you know. So it was heavily, you know, Istanbul Technical University is like 90% of men, obviously, but molecular biology department especially. I mean, men want more money, probably that's why they don't want to be, or they see it as a being teacher. So that's why it was, my department was heavily woman dominated, but sometimes it's just being human or your personality is actually the issue, not your gender. But I managed somehow to not to take notice any of this going on around me. I managed to publish my papers, do some research, funding, coming to the UK as a visitor, going back. And I have amazing friends doing fantastic science. So you can't do that if you want to stay in your countries, especially now because we are part of European Union, you know, as an associate country. You know, Middle East Technical University, they have fantastic fellowships and European Union grants. So it's not impossible. People do good science there.
Sorry, just a quick thing to add. I mean, I haven't been in Turkey in research for too long, but when things get difficult and in a setting, the bits that I find really helpful is finding power in pockets, like sort of these small, then really honing down, making grassroots initiatives, you know, finding friends and educators that you can sort of continue the momentum with, despite all the restrictions, despite the unavailability of certain things. So maybe that does go into, it is a way of ignoring in a way, but it does also help you keep your sanity and your motivation.
Yeah, and I think that this is not just true for scientists in Turkey, but everywhere. Collaborations are really what move us forward. And especially if you're in a tough setting, then having international collaborations, and some of the best people that I worked with do work and do science in Turkey. And so making yourself part of the global communities, I think, may be a good way to go.
Any other questions? Yes. Here and then.
I'd like to ask.
Can you introduce yourself?
Of course, I'm Tuba. I'm an interdisciplinary studies. I'm enrolled in here at the Cambridge and work on connecting science. I'd like to hear a little bit about your reflections on the role of your partners and family, because a little anecdote, I moved to the UK just 6 months ago, and all my network, not only Turkish, were saying, oh my God, you're so lucky that your partner agreed to do so. which I found very bizarre. But on the other hand, I felt lucky because we were flexible. But when you have family responsibilities, I think it makes a difference when you make your decisions about your career, about where to live. So can you talk a little bit about the role of your partners or family in shaping your, place and the decision?
Let's take a few more questions. Now.
Thank you very much. I'm Berna Özge, a bit older than you. I wish my daughter were here because she's also a scientist. But I hope she will watch the video because she's doing interdisciplinary bioscience at Oxford, doing PhD. There's so much, of course, to discuss, but I would like to ask you your views on funding, because increasingly UK universities, in terms of research, career progression, promotion, encourage scholars, researchers to get external funding. And it seems to be funding of, in my field, business studies, I'm at Royal Holloway, University of London, 40,000 pounds don't count. Given the fact that we left the European Union, so the funding possibilities are narrower now, it seems to be that that's an issue for women, because I'm not sure about the statistics, but as far as in my circles, women don't get very large grants. So that's one area I would like you to reflect on, especially, I guess, in sciences and technology. You need a lot more funding, much larger networks, much bigger grants. Secondly, I just wanted to actually reflect on publications. Again, it's an issue of progression and promotion. When I look at the discipline of management, I see a strong old boy network. Most journals are edited by men, middle-aged men, you said, possibly. They have their own networks. As immigrants, and a woman, I, for example, don't have any networks in the UK. I studied in several countries. I don't have contact with my high school friends. I don't have contact with my undergraduate friends because they're all spread in different places. Having 2 kids and running around for many years, I couldn't maintain these networks. So when it comes to publishing, I feel like I don't know anybody, especially I don't attend every conference because traveling is an issue. And I think I keep seeing some people publishing 10 journal papers a year, 6 journal papers a year, and I can't do it. How do they do this? It's amazing. And mostly men do that. So I would like you to reflect on the issue of publications, journal editing, and the fact that there are these gatekeepers in different disciplines. I'm sure it's different in neuroscience or molecular biology, but in the disciplines that I know, in geography, in management, in business studies, most top journals are basically controlled by male-dominated editorial boards. Thank you.
All right. Maybe on the funding, I have a very quick note. Maybe it's just anecdotal, but I do agree with you. It's funding is usually dependent on your profile as a person, right? I often heard perhaps in the US, they don't fund the project, they fund the individual, and that becomes a problem sometimes. So I remember, and again, we can't really generalize this based on this one anecdote, but I remember one of the feedback that I received that stung the most when I first moved to the UK was my first big grant application. I was a lecturer, everyone else was a professor or a senior lecturer, and I was the PI. And one of the reviewers commented that, why is she leading this? She shouldn't be leading this. There's lots of older people, more established, they should be leading this. But so how do you start doing things when people don't let you do things? And then what happened was my first grant that I ended up getting was anonymously evaluated. So they didn't see the university, they didn't see the costing, they didn't see, it was just the idea, 1-page narrative. And I ended up getting that. So I can't say that the idea was better or worse than the first one. But I can say that this kind of initiative is something that you need to invigorate the research space, because it is hard to separate the project from the individual for a lot of the peer review.
I think, I mean, I was lucky to have some great colleagues actually who helped me writing grants, and in the end, I got big grants, and we sometimes joke that you buy promotion because you tell them I got big grant, $500,000, whatever, and then suddenly you become senior lecturer. As if you change a lot, you know, suddenly you become a greatest scientist. But jokes aside, yes, they need money, and it's a way of proving that you are worth something. You know, external people judge your grant application and give you money. I'm 100% sure some of my applications were rejected because I have a dodgy name and I am a female. I am sure, but also I have great colleagues who help, because it's a skill to write a grant, and in the end, it works. I always think if they are giving away 15 grants, okay, 10 of them were reserved for middle-aged white men. I'm fighting for the other 5. This is how I see it, because especially in our field, they now do all the, you know, reveal their statistics. A few years back, I think, in one funding round, there were 7 Davids or something in the PI names, you know, 30 people get the grant, and how come, I don't know, 10% is called David, but I'm fighting for the other, for the rest, basically. So yes, there are many biases, but sometimes, and that's what I was gonna say, it's difficult to understand why is there a bias, because I saw my middle-aged English colleagues not getting grant, and they don't understand why either. You know, there are so many biases for everything. So, you know, being a woman is one of them, being a Turkish is one of them.
They say that it's always a numbers game.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, a skewed numbers game, the numbers game.
So in my field, at least when you start, there is an opportunity to start with something like, for example, what is called first grant. It is much easier to get. Of course, it's not as big, but still, it helps you build portfolio. So there are these types of smaller grants you can start with. And over time, in your CV, these grants start looking like a lot. And that helps you get much bigger grants. At least for me, that was helpful. And there are also grants might be specific to women. Like there were questions about opportunities that might help specific women. There are, in computer science at least, like there are fellowships which enable women work in the department for 5 years, and quite often that leads to a lectureship position, a permanent position, for example. So there are these types of grants as well. And I also wanted to raise a comment on the publications issue about having like so many people, and especially men having so many publications. I think the trick is collaboration as well. Like I feel that men are more open to collaboration. They are reaching out to more people, collaborating with a lot more people. And it's still possible for women to do the same, but maybe like in job applications, women just don't go for it and are a bit more hesitant. They try to do maybe their own thing. So I do think that it is possible to publish extensively through extensive collaborations. Otherwise, it's not impossible to publish so much. And for the journals, in my area is extremely male dominated, but in all the top journals, there is now at least, there is always one woman co-editor-in-chief. I've been a co-editor-in-chief in some of the top journals, for example. They try to make sure that there is women are represented in the committee, so that it's not just man's word and their connections. So I do think that we are in the right path there.
I want to go back to Tuva, right? Tuva's question with regards to family, right? So it's not only about partners, I guess, and that is related to your question. Like if you have children and if you are trying to raise a family, and how do you cope with everything? And you know, what do your partners do in the meantime? How do they help you, perhaps? And then maybe it's a question about work and life balance. So how do you balance everything? And do you have any tips on that? Oh, sweet. I haven't been steering this since Monday, believe me.
I can maybe talk about that, like first the moving part, because I made the move after I had my children, so they were quite established back in Belgium, and then we decided to move. And when we decided that, we started looking where we can move together, where there are opportunities for both of us, and if one can make like an internal move within the company, and the other one can then find a job around there. So that was basically our plan. So that helped us finalize a couple of cities that we can go to. And then, yeah, I applied to the positions, and my husband found he can do the in-company transfer, and it worked like that. But it's a very difficult problem, and especially with established families, I can imagine it being very difficult. Work-life balance, I think it's about expectation management. And I now realize that in academia, that was, at least for my part, was very badly managed. Because, I mean, in academia, you have an expectation to publish in Nature, Science, get grants, get promotions. But these are very broad goals, and we don't really, at least in my positions, we don't really make them bite-sized portions. So you can't really manage your expectations year to year. So you always feel like you have to do more. You should work in the weekends, you should work in the evenings, you should really spend all your time on trying to reach that golden publication. Now that I switched to industry, it was a bit difficult at first to go through all these like project management tasks, but now I see that we are better managing the expectations in the industry, so I can feel safe, I can feel satisfied with my performance, because I can see that, okay, I'm doing enough, so I can rest. So I think it was changing when I was in academia. For postdocs, they were generating these individual development plans. So I think there are steps now to bring this project management aspect to academia. But I think this is one of the things that we need to tackle in academia to really manage people's expectations.
Maybe just a couple of answers on the side of partners. I think that I have felt also, observing my friends around me who are females in academia. And if your partner works in industry, it seems to be quite a bit more difficult, because they are bound to business hours in many cases, or they may be going to London or wherever it may be. Whereas I think that with, I felt lucky that my partner was academic, and therefore if a child was sick, if he wasn't teaching, he could just run. And so that was quite helpful. And yeah, and in terms of the way that yes, thank you. Work-life balance, it may be, I don't have one, that's why I can't answer. Actually, a few years ago, when we had kids, we made the conscious choice, both of us, to just not open work at home during weekdays, and also in principle on the weekends. And of course, it doesn't always work out, but putting that boundary, and also telling my environment that was my boundary, was very difficult to start with, because I felt like, oh, am I not working enough? Don't I need to prove that I am always available? But, once I started telling people, no, I can't talk to you on Saturday. No, I can't talk to you at 8 p.m. Although you are in the US, but it's 8 p.m. for me, I can't do it. So those things, once I started to say them, I normalized them, and that helps.
I have a bad case of, as the young people call FOMO, when it comes to this, because I'm always thinking opportunities I will miss if I don't work the weekends, or the opportunities, because it seems to be, in the trajectory that you choose, you get these bottlenecks. And it's true that very few people pass, right? It could be it's like, oh, I'll try my best and then I'll relax. I'll try my best and then I'll relax. But there's no end to it. This is also something I realized. It's about like finding my own bar of what am I willing to let go of, and what is the cost of that. And that helped me achieve better balance. And as Zeynep said, like, I think in academia, it's really a bit of a jungle. And only now I'm realizing that this is a blessing. That this is a, you know, without structure that gives me the freedom to decide, you know, how much I want to do what. But it's true that it's very difficult. I don't know anything. So the partner thing, that's interesting because, you know, I would like to have children in the near future. And this is influencing my decision a lot because I'm thinking, you know, where can I get childcare? Can I afford it? You know, what does it look like? My partner, I'm so lucky that my partner is actually willing to fit my plans or if I get an offer, he would be able to join me. And I realize that this is not always the case, especially if you have two academics. I realize that the balance is good also if you have one person in the industry because that gives you more
Yeah, if you're
flexibility.
searching a job together, I think
Yes,
it's better
this is-
to have one person in.
Exactly, it's very difficult to get one position to start with. To have two people get positions is extremely difficult. So these are things that, for me, actually, I would say it's the number one factor that I'm considering in terms of choosing spaces.
Yes, you know, to answer your question, actually, academia is flexible and it's a blessing, but sometimes it's really awful to be flexible because most of the things about the house, it's like, oh, you are flexible, you can go to work around 11 a.m., you know, so can you do it in the morning? Well, no, not really, that's not how it works. But it's been such a long time that I haven't worked in the evenings or at the weekends. It was like, no, I was my boundary. And I said, no, I'm not doing this. So unless there is a deadline to apply for a grant or something, but of course I could have been much more successful than that. I extended it. I could have published in Nature, for instance. I worked harder. But it was conscious choice because I have a family. I don't want to miss my daughter's going on.
We understand, I think. And I think we can end the discussion here. And those of you who are in the audience, we are going to continue the discussions, I'm sure, outside. And we have the exhibition. And please read the stories. There are more inspiring and successful stories out there. In the Empowered Futures exhibition provided by Aydın Foundation. And also a reminder that we will be closing Turkish Week tomorrow, the piano concert with Dara Melda and the 360 library. But I think we've sold out, right? So we don't have any spaces left. Yay, us. So it's just an advertisement of all the wonderful things that we are doing this week. Thank you very much for coming and for engaging.